So, those of you who are here regularly will know that before Christmas we were working through John's Gospel. And we had a little break during December for Advent or Christmas, and now we're getting back to John's Gospel, and we'll do that in the run-up to Easter. In the chapter that we read, we kind of cut in just more than halfway through the chapter for a reading today. So earlier on in the chapter that we read, just as a wee reminder, what we find there is that Mary anoints Jesus' feet with expensive perfume, and she wipes his feet with her hair, much to the disgust of Judas, who felt that money, the money for the perfume should have been given to the poor. But actually, we then find out that he was stealing the money. So, and then after that, Jesus enters Jerusalem on the donkey, and the crowd are all out there shouting and cheering, and it's great. But almost immediately, Jesus says, but. And he then predicts his death. And that's where you get the wee story about the snake in the wilderness and being lifted up in death. And then John takes us back to that story where there was the plague of snakes, and they had to look up to the bronze snake that Moses made so that they might be healed when they were bitten. I don't know about you. I don't know if you've ever been in the position of being really excited about something, and you've spent ages preparing and organising and planning, and you're ready for the big reveal, and maybe your family are there or your friends are there, and they're all kind of chatting away, and you do the roll, ta-da! And, do you know, they just keep on talking. Nobody cares. You've gone to all this work and all this effort, and it's like, and you get really annoyed because you've put time and effort and planning and everything into it, and they just don't really bother. Suppose God had an audience when he was creating everything. Just imagine. The earth and the sea separate and the land is formed. And then you have trees and plants in every conceivable colour. And God makes them all and they're all there. And it's all looking great. And then there are fish and birds and animals. Again, every size and shape that you can imagine. And God looks at them and says, oh, this is amazing. This is really good. And then at last, the human race, the crowning glory of creation. And God looks at it and says, wow, that is very good. It's just, look at them, they're wonderful. But the audience was unimpressed. They just went on having a wee conversation. Not really bothered. Well, you know, wasn't quite what we expected. Well, I wouldn't have done it that way. That kind of thing. John has been telling us the story of new creation as we've gone through the gospel. He's been building up the signs, things that we should be looking for that explain a little bit more about who Jesus is and what he did and why he is really important. And so, in chapter 2, Jesus turns water into wine. And then you have the healing of the nobleman's son in chapter 4. The healing of a crippled man in chapter 5. Feeding the multitude from 5 loaves and 2 small fish in chapter 6. Then healing a man who had been born blind in chapter 9. And lastly, raising Lazarus from the dead. John has hinted, and he writes later in the gospel, that Jesus did so many things that you couldn't possibly write them all down. But he's chosen these for a specific purpose, and that's to tell us about new creation, about new dimensions to God's work, new exodus, new light, new life. But everyone's just gone on with their conversations. They're not really paying any attention. So John remembers that lack of interest in all of those things that Jesus did. Here were people who had seen him, who had heard him, and who weren't really that bothered, quite honestly. And his mind goes back to 2 Old Testament themes. Moses in Egypt, who went to Pharaoh and just did this whole list of amazing signs that God was at work. And Pharaoh and his court weren't bothered. They didn't listen. They didn't believe. They were so caught up that the conclusion is that their hearts were hardened. And hardened so that God's liberation of his people, when it finally came, would be all the more dramatic. And then Isaiah faced Israelites who were in total rebellion against God, to the point where he says they were like Pharaoh. Their eyes were shut and their hearts were hard. They were so caught up in sin that the only option God had was judgment. But even then, we are told Isaiah glimpsed something of the future. He saw Jesus. Even in the middle of judgment, Isaiah saw that an extraordinary new work of salvation was coming. And then John looks at the Judeans, the people from Jerusalem in the south of the country of his day. People who saw Jesus, who saw the signs, who saw what he had done and heard what he'd said, and they didn't believe. And he links them with the earlier Israelites. And he says even those who had softer hearts, who did believe, didn't speak because they were more worried about what other people would say than about what God thought. But John is clear, and we should be too, that the new creation came in Jesus. Isn't it good to hear in the Times, if anybody is in Christ, they are a new creation? A great thought to put in a national newspaper. And it came in Christ. We are new creations. All of these signs that John has given us up until now are leading one after another to a point in the gospel when they come together and leave history stamped forever with the image of a man dying on a cross, lifted up for the world to see, opening blind eyes and softening hard hearts with the love of God. One of the things that we have to realize from this story is that there will always be people who don't believe. I don't know if you've ever witnessed a miracle. I know I have, and I know people who tell me they have. I don't know if you've ever witnessed a miracle. I remember praying for somebody and God healed them. I've prayed for loads of people who weren't healed, but on one occasion I prayed for somebody who was healed. A miracle. God did an amazing thing. And I remember thinking, do you know, if only there was more of that. Do you know, wouldn't it be great if there was more of that? And God was doing these miracles all over the place. People would be thronging into the church. Well, this tells us a different story. This tells us that there are always going to be people who don't believe, even if the miracle affects them. When we used to do prayers in healing rooms, people could come in off the street. No faith, no nothing, didn't know God, didn't know anything, but they came in and asked for prayer. Now, God healed many of these folk, and they went away healed, but they didn't go away Christian. And I don't know if they are now or not. We have to trust that God was at work in their lives, doing something and drawing them. But they certainly weren't flocking to church. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I think we should be praying for miracles. I'm not saying it's not worth the effort. Please pray for miracles as often as you can, and look for miracles, and look for God doing new and exciting things all the time. Pray for miracles, because that's really important. If it's only to strengthen your own faith, then it's a brilliant thing. And if God heals somebody, amen, that's great for them and for all of us as well. So it's not a reason not to ask. But just as there are people who are not going to believe, there will also be people who choose not to talk about Jesus because they're embarrassed, because they're more worried about what people are going to think about them than what God thinks about them. And that's not a good place to be. John makes that quite clear. He says, actually, it's the response of somebody who's more interested in being liked by people than by God. So, if that all is true, why are we here? Why do we talk about Jesus? Why do we run alpha courses and messy church? Why should we pray for God to pour out his Spirit on Prestwick? Because although some people will not believe, and some people will find themselves in a point where they're not willing to speak, other people like Matt Bird, who wrote that article, will find their lives totally transformed by an encounter with Jesus. There are people in our community who've never heard the true story and meaning of Christmas. They don't know the significance of Easter. Jesus is unknown to them, and the church is a complete mystery. And yet, when they're presented with the story of Jesus, they respond in faith, because God's been at work all along. If you love God and you love this congregation and you want it to continue into the future, then the truth is you need to share Jesus with other people. The days of mass evangelistic campaigns, the Tell Scotland, the Billy Graham thing with thousands of people going to Hampden or Ibrox or wherever and doing all that stuff, that was fine for its day. But this is not its day. It doesn't work like that anymore. Actually, what is much more effective nowadays is simply being friendly, giving time to people, having a conversation, being honest, being yourself. That's what makes a difference. If Jesus makes a difference in your life and you spend time with people, they'll notice. You don't need to be in their face. I'm not suggesting you take a Bible and metaphorically batter people with it. That didn't work. It didn't work years ago, and it doesn't work now. You don't walk into your workplace and go, "You're all doomed and you're going to hell." That will get a response. Perhaps not the one you're looking for, but it will get a response. But just be honest. Be yourself. It doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be fancy. You don't need to have a whole theology worked out and be able to answer every question. You just need to be yourself and have a conversation. But sometimes folks say, "Oh, well, I just do my best. I try my best. I work hard. I'm a nice person. I'm a good person." And you could be an amazingly compassionate, caring, generous, loving, outgoing person. And you could work really hard in your workplace. And if you never say, "I do this because I love Jesus," then you're just a nice, kind, generous, compassionate person in a workplace. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. We should all be like that. But actually, it's only when you get to the point of saying, "I'm like this because Jesus makes a difference in my life," that people will understand what it is that makes you tick. Romans 10:14-16. How can people have faith in the Lord and ask Him to save them if they've never heard about Him? Good question. And how can they hear unless someone tells them? And how can anyone tell them without being sent by the Lord? The scriptures say it's a beautiful sight to see even the feet of someone coming to preach the good news. Yet not everyone has believed the message. For example, the prophet Isaiah asked, "Lord, has anyone believed what we said?" How can people have faith in the Lord and ask Him to save them if they've never heard about Him? They can't. They can't. Somebody has to tell them. So he goes on, how can they hear unless someone tells them? Now, some of you might instantly go to verse 15, this next bit. How can anyone tell them without being sent by the Lord? And you'll go, ha-ha! Aha! See? Told you somebody would do that. Aha! That's not me, because I'm not sent. I'm not a minister, I'm not an elder, I'm not a leader of any sort, so that does not apply to me. So there. And what I want to say is, that is not correct. It is not true. Because you see, Paul also says that we are all ambassadors for Christ. Every one of us. We don't have the option of saying, I am not sent, I am not called. I cannot speak. Because if you are a child of God, you are an ambassador of God. And you have a role, whether you like it or not. And sometimes the role that we play as an ambassador is not one that honors God. But we're still speaking, nevertheless. So all of us, in that general sense, are called to speak for God. We had a friend who, with his wife, it was a missionary, and they spent, I think it was about 17 years working away overseas and saw very little fruit for their effort. And I suspect there would be many a time when he would have asked that question, has anyone, is it worth it? Why are we here? What are we doing? Why do we do the things that we do? Has anybody listened? Has it made a difference to one buddy? But they were faithful. They effectively tilled the soil. They planted seeds and they watered seeds. But they didn't get the harvest. It was the people who came after them that saw a church be planted and begin to grow. But they had 17 years of work beforehand, of simply telling people about Jesus. So we won't always see the benefit of what we do, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. We're still called. We're all called to speak. Now, what you may not realize is that from the front, you see everything. So when you think you're very surreptitiously passing the sweeties, no, you're not. Right? When you're standing here at the front, you can see it. When you're stifling the wee yawn, and when I'm looking at Lorraine over here, I can see you out the corner of my eye. Right? So when you make a movement, or you pick your nose, or you do whatever you're going to do, you can see it. And actually, when you make a movement, it draws your attention. Right? So you see everything from here. And what I'm beginning to see now is looks of panic. It's the. What do you mean I've got to? What do you mean I've got to speak? Me? I've never. I can't say that. I can't. And people. No, hang on a minute. Called to speak. I wouldn't know where to begin. I just don't know. So here's my gift to you. At the beginning of 2018, I'm going to give you a phrase, one of the most important and useful phrases you'll ever hear in your life. I want you to take it in. I want you to absorb it, and I want you to use it at every opportunity. And I suspect it will work in 99% of occasions. There are some where it just wouldn't make sense, so it won't work in every circumstance, but it's really useful. Are you ready? Is any more than one of you ready? Right? You're ready. So here it is. The phrase that you really need most of all, I don't know. I don't know. You see, when somebody asks you a question, you can say, I don't know. In fact, you can be really smart because you can put the inference on the different part, the inflection on different parts of the phrase. I don't know. My wife knows I don't know. I don't know. You would think I should know, but I don't know. Or I don't know. See, it works in all sorts of different ways. And if you're really clever, you can play around with it. You could even make it, I'm not sure. It's 2 for 1. It's that time of year, the bargains, right? Give me 2 for 1. I don't know, or I'm not sure. And if you're really practiced, you can really jazz it up. I don't know. That's a great question, though. What do you think? It's like Andy Murray and Nadal, and you just return the serve. There you go, have that back. I don't know. What do you think? See, that's what we do at Alpha. Somebody asks you a question. I have no idea. What do you think? You see, somehow, over generations, this idea has risen that you need to have all the answers. That you need to be able to know the answer to every single question anybody might possibly ask you before you would be able to speak to somebody else about Jesus. And that's nonsense. The truth is, it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know. You might want to say, I'll find out. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be honest. Nobody has all the answers. I've never met a human being that has all the answers. But somehow, we find it really difficult to say, I don't know. Because we think we should have all the answers. You just need to be yourself. It doesn't need to be difficult. You don't need to make it difficult. Every one of us has a story. If you're a child of God, you have your story of faith, and nobody can take that story from you. It's your story. They might not believe it, they might not agree with you, but it's your story and you can tell it. And people will listen. I was asked if I had a challenge for 2018. And I said, no, I don't have a challenge for 2018. But the good news is, I do now. So I went away and thought about it, thought, here we go. Here's a challenge. So that's what your little bits of paper are for. If you have a little bit of paper. I don't have two little bits of paper. You can share a bit. So, what I want you to do, I want you to think of 5 people. Friends, family, work colleagues, whatever. 5 people that you're fairly confident are not yet believers. Or maybe they're in the category of not really sure, not really wanting to speak to people, not really that confident-y. Do you know what I mean? So 5 people, and I want you to write their names down. Now, maybe you're thinking, hang on a minute, I fall into that category. I'm not really that sure. I'm not really that confident. I don't really like speaking to people. I've never actually told anybody that I go to church. That might be you. So you might want to add your own name as a 6th, or you might want to, it's not cheating, you could add your own name to one of the 5. Right? But 5 people, 5 names. And when you've got that written down, what I then want you to do, here's the challenge. I want you, as often as you remember, to pray for them by name. Now, it's not a guilt trip. If you don't remember for a week, don't feel all guilty about it. If you can pray every day for them, that's ideal. But don't get too. But as often as you remember, take that list out and pray for them by name. And you're saying to yourself, maybe, I don't even know how to do that. How would you do that? Well, here you are. I'll tell you how to do it. Keep it simple. Lord, I want to pray for Boot, Thingy, Jimmy, whatever they are, that you would work in their life. I want to pray for whoever, that you would draw them to yourself. That's it. It doesn't need to be any more complicated or difficult than that. God understands that in the simplicity, there's much more going on. Lord, I want to pray for that you would bless them. Keep it simple. Doesn't need to be complicated. So you have 5 people, you're going to pray for them as often as you remember, by name. And then thirdly, to ask God for opportunities to speak to them. Now, if you've been a Christian for any length of time and you say to me, I never get those opportunities, I have to say to you, it's because you're not looking. You're not looking. Again, you can make it simple and straightforward. Somebody says to you this week, what did you do at Christmas? Well, I went to church. I love it at that time of year. We have a candlelit service. It was lovely. It was great. What did you do at the weekend? Well, I was in church, and it looks really different now. All the Christmas decorations are away. And you might get, church? You? Because they don't know. You've not made it a big thing. You've just introduced it into a conversation. It's simple. It's easy. And it starts something. And who knows where it might end up. It doesn't need to be complicated. So ask God to give you opportunities to speak to them. And the last thing is speak to them. You have to do that bit. You actually have to do that bit. So pray for them. Look for opportunities to speak. And then actually speak. And if you do that during this year for these 5 people, it may be by this time next year, all 5 will have come to faith because you prayed for them and because you took opportunities to speak. Maybe like our guy earlier, you stir something in them that's an interest, and encourage them to read the Bible, encourage them to come to church, just have a conversation, do an alpha course, whatever it is, and see lives transformed. because you were up for a challenge to pray and to speak. Amen.